Week 12, 49ers Packers, Lambeau Field was the afternoon game. It was America's game of the week. Two rivals facing off, but under very different circumstances. Not a playoff game, it was a regular season game. When the 49ers were obviously down, the final score would be 38-10 Packers, as the 49ers got off to a terrible start. Packers went right down the field. They scored. And it's very clear that the injuries did not allow the 49ers to truly compete in this one. I mean, there gets to a point where enough is enough. You can say next man up over and over again, but when you look at the roster of the 49ers and you look at all the guys who are down, you start with your quarterback, Brock Purdy, out. Trent Williams, the left tackle, out. Brandon Ayuk, the number one receiver, out. On defense, Nick Bosa, the team's best pass rusher, still remains one of the best pass rushers in football, whether he's tallying up big sack numbers or not. Out. Dre Greenlaw hasn't played the whole season, and then your number one corner, at least coming into the season, Charvarius Ward, out. Those are 6 major injuries, and that would be too much for just about any team to overcome. Packers win. They win in dominant fashion. It was actually the largest margin of victory in the entire history of the series. That's what was said on the television broadcast on Fox at the conclusion of the game. It doesn't surprise me. That was what was so frustrating, especially in the 90s when the 49ers played the Packers, was it seemed like you just couldn't beat them, but it was always close. It was always within reach, and they couldn't do it. Well, the game started off very poorly, and you could see the injured players and the loss of them and the voids of them out there. Not so much Brock Purdy. I mean, that's obvious when you don't have your starting quarterback. But just look at the two lines. The offensive line without Trent Williams, they could never establish a ground game. Part of it was, sure, they were always behind. They were behind from the very beginning of the game. They were behind. That's one thing. And then they couldn't get any kind of consistent pass rush. I mean, Jordan Love had way too much time to pass. Leonard Floyd actually had a very good game. He had 2 third-down sacks. He applied some pressure, but when you just take that opening drive, man, did they miss Nick Bosa. I'm going to repeat this, whether he gets sacks or not, his presence on the field and all the attention he gets when he's getting doubled or he's getting chipped, without him on the defense, you see the rest of the team and you're like, man, this is not good. Fred Warner, I don't know if he ever recovered from that injury he had, I believe the ankle earlier in the season. He hasn't been the same, but what else do you have left on the defense? You have a lot of average to below average defensive linemen, or just inexperienced linemen who are prospects, but they're not, they don't exactly have high ceilings. You know what you're getting with them. They're really more just role players. Your linebacker play, besides Fred Warner, is seriously lacking. You have some real young talent in the secondary, but it's very young. Not a lot on defense when you're missing both Nick Bosa and Dre Greenlaw. You see how thin they are in the front seven. I mean, whatever happens this season happens, but they need to get more talent. Oh, and you know what forgot to mention all those injuries? Javon Hargrave. He's been a disappointment, but it still hurts not having him out there. I mean, just go through the list on offense. Purdy, Williams, Ayuk. Defense, you're missing Bosa, Hargrave, Greenlaw, Ward. And then go to the offense. Allen, obviously, I mean, there's just so much that's obvious to just even a casual viewer. He was struggling. He was rusty. He got off to a very slow start. It's been so long since he's been in a game, but since there's been game action for him, and then he has the broken finger on his left hand. I mean, I sort of questioned Shanahan. I know he's been in the system and all, but was it the better option to have him out there instead of Dobbs? I question that. And the slow start was enough to just sink him. And the Packers were not very impressive. They got the victory. They did what they should have done. But they were beatable. They will get in the playoffs, but they are a beatable team, and I would not be surprised if they don't get out. I just don't see them getting past the second round. I would even be somewhat surprised if we got out the first round. Having to play on the road, they're not going to get the division. They're going to be a wild card team. Jordan Love, you'll see the high highs and low lows with him. And the 49ers had a lot of chances. After the slow start, they had the really good touchdown drive late second quarter. And then early third quarter, they could have really made it interesting. And they stayed within reach, but all of the mistakes, the miscues, and just start with the tackling. I mean, I'm not surprised by the offense, but the tackling on defense. Josh Jacobs had 14 broken tackles. There were 14 missed tackles by the 49ers defense, and that was the most any single player the entire season had in one game. And I don't know what the final number was, but they did show that it was over 20 missed tackles. 20 missed tackles in this game only. 20 missed tackles. As Josh Jacobs just destroyed him in the first half. He had 3 total touchdowns. The damage was done, and it was done early. And the fact was the Packers just didn't have to do that much in the passing game. I mean, really the biggest play that would have happened was right before halftime that Watson dropped a touchdown. It was a beautiful throw by Jordan Love. He drops the touchdown. I mean, the Packers could have been in the 40s. They could have been. But on the other hand, the 49ers could have been... They should have had a lot more than 10 points. I think the lack of good play calling again hurt the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey did not have a good game. I don't think the offensive line helped him much with opening holes. I don't know how much you can get on McCaffrey. Of course, the biggest play he made, then it was the reception that he fumbled. That was one of the miscues in this one. It was, I mean, above all else, it was the missed tackling and it was the penalties. I mean, it felt like there was a penalty on almost every return, whether it was a kick return, the return Debo had after halftime that was called back. There were at least 2 punt returns that there were holding calls on that killed field position. As field position, they could not get good field position. They were able to drive down a few times, and they just, once they got around the 50 or past the 50, they just died out there, and just flag after flag after flag. And some of them to me were pretty ticky-tacky, including one of the ones that actually set up a Packers touchdown. Not a lot of contact, but just the missed tackles, the penalties. It couldn't do little things right. I mean, the terrible fumble. I mean, Allen was having a hard time holding onto the ball. Christian McCaffrey has not been able to get going in any of these games since his return. Jordan Mason had one good run, and then after his, he had the biggest run of the game for the 49ers, and they take him out really fast. George Kittle coming back at a nice game. I mean, again, he makes big plays as a receiving tight end down the field. Why can't we see more of this? I mean, where were the running back screens? Where were the tight end screens? They weren't in there today. I mean, the most interesting, exciting play there was the play that went to Debo. His one catch. That was, I mean, I have to see it again to describe it, but that was one of the better play calls I've seen, and something, I'm saying, where's that been, Shanahan? But if I have a loser in this game, someone who really let the team down, I'm going with Debo. He had one reception. That's it. And you're supposed to be the number one receiver. You're getting paid like a number one receiver. You talk a good lot. You have your own show, your own podcast. And right now you're playing nothing better than a third receiver. And I say the same thing I did last time. He shouldn't be wearing 1. He should be wearing 0. He's been nearly a 0 out there on the field. The interception, which was a backbreaker that Allen threw, it went through Debo's hands. It wasn't on Allen, it was on Debo. That was terrible. And then he dropped another ball later in the second half. He had more drops than he had receptions. Dropped balls. So on offense, I don't know who came to play except for George Kittle. I'm not going to get on Jennings. Jennings was all right. Besides those two, you one of the things you can't do is you cannot hide poor line play. That being offensive line and defensive line. You can't hide that. And that's even with Trent Williams playing and Nick Bosa playing, as they've had, up to this point this season. You can see the lack of talent around them. If I was the 49ers and I'm looking at my first 3 picks in the next draft, I'm saying I'm going and addressing the lines. I'd probably use, and it depends on who's on the board and who's available, but I'd say, hey, first round, I'm going to get the best defensive lineman available. Whether that be, again, an edge rusher, because you need another, or a stud defensive tackle. You need to be able to stop the run. That's one thing. You need someone in the middle, because it's hard to watch the missed tackling, but it's bad up front. When you're getting gashed every week. I mean, you can talk about playoffs all you want, and I think it's a joke myself at this point, because you need so much help to get in. I'm not saying it's impossible, but let's just say you lose to the Bills next week. You pretty much have to run the table after that. And the 49ers haven't won 2 games in a row this season. What makes you believe they're going to start winning now, when they have their backs absolutely up against the wall? I don't know, but I'd probably go defensive line, and then I would pick whoever's the next best available player on the board. If you get a tackle in the first round, and get them, an offensive tackle. But if you can't, then go with defensive lineman, a really good edge rusher, and then address guard and center with your second, third round picks. But I mean, there's just so many mistakes. We're not just talking about the missed tackles. And it was unbelievable how many there were. Gave you the numbers, the penalties. But Debo's ball that should have been caught goes through his hands. I mean, whether you want to call that a drop or not. I mean, he had more balls that went through or off his hands than he had receptions. Yeah, that went for an interception. McCaffrey ends up fumbling, and then you had Allen just not having good pocket awareness. He fumbles. Also deep in Packers territory. I mean, they just lost field position all day long. And on defense, you had the dropped interception. And Tom Brady was spot on with what he said. You just can't do these things on the road and expect to win. I mean, but these are the kinds of things the 49ers have done all year long, even when they were healthier. So I don't think it was some great victory for the Packers, though they almost put up 40 points. I mean, just look who you're playing out there. This was not, to me, you could call it a revenge game from their perspective, I suppose, but you weren't playing the same team. Yeah, they had the 49er uniforms out there, but this was a shell of the team from last year, from that divisional playoff game, and just the terrible season continues. I'm not surprised by the outcome. I'm not all that disappointed. I mean, what did you expect to happen at Lambeau Field this week? Did you really expect them to go in there once Brock Purdy was out? You knew he was going to be out. You knew Bosa was going to be out. It was going to be a hard game even with all your guys. But once I heard Trent Williams was out before the game, just forget about it. It's not going to happen. There's just not enough out there. And can I say the division stinks too? I mean, the Rams got smoked by the Eagles on Sunday Night Football. We're told that the Cardinals are supposed to be the best team, and then they lose up in Seattle to the Seahawks. The Cardinals lose in Seattle, and I know the Seahawks aren't anything hot, because even with all the 49ers flaws and injuries, if you just give me George Kittle last week, they win. They win that one. But they're under 500. They're in last place in the division. And now they've got to get ready for a Sunday night game against the Bills, who are coming off a bye week. And that's one of the things that gets me. I mean, how many times has the 49ers played teams coming off bye weeks? The Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Seahawks, and now the Bills. I mean, you want to talk about a rest disadvantage. Wow. I mean, that's a lot of teams that you have to face coming off a bye. That's really tough. Well, we'll see what happens. At least you would hope Brock Purdy's going to be back. As if you didn't appreciate Purdy and you just say, well, he's an average quarterback. Well, you could see the difference between him and, well, any of the backups they could have put in. Trent Williams may not be having the season he's had up to his lofty standard, but he's still one of the best tackles in football. Nick Bosa may not be the defensive player of the year, Nick Bosa, but he's one of the most effective defensive ends in football, and he does make everyone around him better.